Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Scott Brabrand, Executive Director for VASS, and we're delighted to have you with us today. And the bottom line is we're here today to talk about the 1% sales tax local option that just passed the General Assembly and was signed by the governor. I want to be clear with a couple of things right up front. We're sharing this with you now as we know some systems, some superintendents in their communities have immediate interest in this tool to support school construction and want to be able to use this tool as soon as possible. And so we'll have a few other slides. Obviously, the deciding factor about whether to start doing something immediately or to wait later, perhaps next year instead of this November, is something that you'll discern with your community, and we'll have others talking about that in just a few minutes. However, for those of you who this is an immediate and urgent need to have this tool so that you can do school construction, we want to be clear that VASS believes there is a legal and reasonable pathway for getting the 1% sales tax referendum on the November 3rd ballot, the November 3rd ballot for this year, 2026, as long as your local governing body passes a resolution. Now, that's your city council or board of supervisors. A school board can also pass a resolution in support of this, but again, your local governing body will need to pass a resolution, and a court will order that the referendum be included on the ballot. And we believe the date for all that needing to be done is August 14th. So again, we're glad you're all here today. This is an important tool. If it's an urgent tool for you to use, we believe there's a pathway to do it by August 14th. And we're going to walk you through several pieces of information today to make that possible. And first up is Micah Schwartz, our amazing VASS legal counsel, who's going to give a little bit more of sort of the legislative and even legal overview of this new tool. So I'll turn it over to Micah.
Thanks, Scott, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Micah Schwartz. As Scott said, I'm the VASS legal counsel. I'll cover some of the legislative and legal dynamics here. So first of all, as Scott explained, when passing the budget in June, the General Assembly and the governor created a new part of the code that allows for localities to have services within the locality, which can be used exclusively for the construction or renovation of schools. Let me pause on that point for a minute. There's going to be some ambiguity to that, I think, that will have to be explored in each division. I think it's written pretty broadly. It luckily doesn't say just construction. It also says renovation. So I think there's the ability to use this kind of sales tax to do renovations to a school. But there's always going to be some ambiguity. Again, for instance, could you use this sales tax to build a new central office? Can you use it to build baseball fields? I think the answers to these questions are probably yes. I just want to note that it's an open question and something that each division will have to figure out. Let's go next, though, to kind of the bigger issue here, and the one that Scott alluded to a moment ago, which is the mechanics for doing this, and then also, again, like the timeline for doing it. So in terms of the mechanics, the statute itself provides for what the mechanics are, and they are this. A locality can levy a 1% sales tax, again, for the purposes of building or renovating schools, but it has to do a couple things first. It can't just do it. It needs to actually get the locality's approval for doing it first, or let me be more clear, the electorate's approval for doing so first. And it does that in the form of a referendum. So before any school division can have this kind of 1% sales tax applied, there first has to be a referendum on a ballot, and the majority of the voters have to approve it. That begs the question of how you get a referendum on the ballot, and the statute provides some explanation about that on answering that question too. First, a division has to have the city council or board of supervisors pass a resolution asking to have the referendum. And specifically, or I guess kind of mechanically, what it's doing is asking the court, a local court, to order that the referendum be placed on the ballot. So there's two steps that need to happen. In other words, it's not the school board passing a resolution. It can do that if it wants to, but that's not really important. The important thing is the local government passing a resolution asking to have a referendum and a court ordering the referendum. And then you have the actual referendum and the voters have to actually approve it. And then you get your sales tax. There is some question here about timing. And the reason is not because of anything that was in the budget, but rather existing law, which says that to have an item placed on a ballot, to have a referendum placed on a ballot, the court has to order it 81 days before it would actually appear on the ballot. And so if you want to have this on the ballot for the next general election, which is on November 3rd, that means you have to have a court order it 81 days in advance, and that's August 14th. So that's where that deadline of August 14th comes from that Scott mentioned at the beginning. Again, to be clear, if you want it to be on the November ballot, you have to do it by August 14th. In case you're wondering if you can have it be on a ballot before November 3rd, practically speaking, the answer is no, because you could have a court order it as soon as tomorrow, but if you count 81 days from here, you get into either September or October, and you can't have a special election 55 days before a general election. So the next available date to do this is November 3rd. And to have it on the November 3rd ballot, you have to have your city council or board of supervisors approving this and have a court ordering it by August 14th. The reason we're shading that point some is there is unfortunately some ambiguity here, and I'm hesitant to even say it out loud because it brings some life into an interpretation that currently I don't think anyone's making. And again, I don't think we need to be the ones to make it, but I think it's worth you hearing it because I'd rather you hear it here than be surprised by it in the future. We now have early voting in Virginia during all of our elections, and early voting for this November 3rd election starts on September 18th. If you make the interpretation that the court has to order the referendum 81 days before the beginning of early voting, which again starts on September 18th, that would mean that the referendum had to be ordered by a court on June 29th. So 9 days ago, which is obviously not only impossible now, but was always impossible because the statute didn't go into effect until 2 days later on July 1. So as you can see from the way I explained it, this clearly was not the General Assembly's intention. I mean, we think the General Assembly intended to have this as an option that was available for the November 3rd election. But again, if you think that the way that the code should be interpreted is that you have to have a court order this before early voting starts, then that would be impossible for the November 3rd election. There's a decent argument for that interpretation, and anyone who's been paying attention to the recent Supreme Court case concerning congressional districting, I mean, the court came to a similar conclusion in a somewhat similar situation, saying that what the General Assembly did, it needed to do before early voting even started. So again, I think there is some argument that it's already too late for November 3rd, but I think it's the weaker of the arguments. We can talk offline if you like as to why I think that August 14th is still your deadline if you want to try to get it on the November 3rd ballot. I'm going to segue in a moment here to Laura Novi to discuss the political considerations involved and whether or not it's worth trying to do that. To be more clear what I mean by that, you could do it by the November 3rd ballot, but you don't have to. You might decide, and this is what we're going to spend a lot of time over the next 50 minutes talking about whether it makes sense to instead wait until the next November ballot, November 2027, in which there's really no question about whether or not you have time to do that. You have plenty of time to do that. And finally, you could pick another date that was neither this November nor next November. You could ask the court to order a special election. You can't have it whenever you want it because it isn't supposed to interfere with primary elections, which are usually over the summer. And as I said before, you can't ask for it to be 2 months before either a general election or a primary. So there's kind of a law school exam question that arises here, which is when could you do it? And the short answer is basically in the spring. You could do this early in 2027. I think there's also probably a pocket of time when you could do it in the summer of 2027. But basically, I think the question for most localities is going to be, do you want to try to do this for this November 3rd? Or is it worth just punting until the spring or next year? And I think on how to make that decision, that's ultimately a political question that I'm going to punt to Laura. Though, I'm sorry, I just noticed there's one bullet point I didn't hit. though this money can only be used for school renovations and construction, there is an exception to that. In Northern Virginia, it can also be used for transportation purposes. But that's in addition to school construction, not in place of school construction. So again, statewide, you can use this money for state construction. I'm sorry, for school construction. In Northern Virginia, you also have the benefit of using it for transportation purposes. Okay, so sorry to add that piece onto the end. I'll pass it now to Laura to talk about political considerations.
Thanks so much, Micah, and happy to be here today to talk about the opportunity. We're all very excited about the budget language that has passed. This has been something that obviously has been a priority for VASS some time, and we've really appreciated the opportunity to work with VACO and others to get this passed. I would note that there are some important considerations to take into your planning as you're thinking about whether or not this makes sense for this November or for a different time. On November 3rd, there are a number of general and special elections that are going to be occurring already. You know, we've got the U.S. Senate election. We've got we'll have a U.S. House of Representatives election going on at the same time. There probably are some local offices, both general and special elections going on the November 3rd ballot. And then the other items are, which are unique to this year, are three constitutional amendments that'll be on the ballot. You have one that will enshrine the reproductive freedoms in the state constitution. The second will automatically restore voting rights to Virginians who've been convicted of felonies after their release from jail. And third is intended to protect the rights of two adults to marry regardless of race, gender, or sex. And so really important to think about all the different things that'll be on the ballot this November when trying to decide whether or not it makes sense to go through with the school construction and renovation. Are there going to be people that are working for or against what's on the ballot, and how does this fit into that? And so I would just point that out as you're having those conversations, to be thinking about all the different things that are on the ballot and all the different stakeholders that will be active during this election cycle, and whether it makes sense to work with some of those or to wait until a better time. And so just would identify those as some potential opportunities or obstacles that may be specific to your area. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lori, who's going to really get into the details of some of the process pieces going forward.
Thank you, Laura. I'm grateful to be here with you all, and grateful to be in partnership with VASS. And we saw this opportunity for this tool coming. And so a while back, we started to put together, with support from your VASS team here, some communication templates that have been shared out with all of you. If you're not familiar with that, there's just a visual of what that looks like on the right-hand side of our slides. But in those templates, you are able to make a copy and then customize those templates to your needs. But there are some first attempts in these templates to communicate to families and staff, what does this all mean? You know, this new tool. We created a frequently asked questions that could be placed on your division's website. We also created an example referendum timeline, and trying to do so in a way for those who might be considering moving forward with this November election. And also grateful that Washington County Public Schools shared a sample resolution that they have used in the past. For those of you that, again, might be considering for November, you have some examples to look at. We are going to talk a little bit later too, that there will be a second webinar coming up where we can learn from our Virginia peers. My goal with you for the rest of our time is to talk about now what. So understanding this new tool is a first step. And then the question is like, what's next, right? So first, we think it's important to determine, what does this mean for your division? Every division is going to be in a different spot, whether you're working through like a long range master facilities plan, or you are, you all have your capital improvement plans, and where you might be in that process would probably determine whether or not this is an urgent time for you. Also, what will be important as a next step is collaborating with, of course, your school board and understanding this tool, but also working hand in hand or side by side with either your city council or your county board of supervisors, maybe you already have an architect or a construction firm engaged with you. So again, this will be an important piece, is collaborating with all of those key leaders around this potential opportunity. And then the last bullet is really important. If you are moving forward, whether you're moving forward for this November ballot, or if you're hoping to head in a year or even 2 years, now is the time to start engaging your community around your needs and why this is an important investment or tool for you all to look at with your community members as we think about our why and supporting our students. So that's what I'm going to focus on a little bit today. And why does this community engagement matter now, whether it's November for you this year or in the future? What we've learned at the Donovan Group, and we work with school divisions and districts across the entire country on all types of referenda efforts. I've learned personally that the longer the runway is for your community in terms of understanding that you have needs that need to be addressed and that they can't be addressed with your current funding formula or situation, and that you're going to need their support for that funding. The sooner you can get your community on a runway of understanding those needs, and the longer that runway is up into the actual ask, the higher success rate is what we've been able to see or determine. So when we think about, why community engagement matters, if you are moving forward with this tool, now is really essential to get your community to understand why they might want to support that. Because again, as Micah shared, they would have to support that through a referendum election. So we know that communities rarely vote yes because they just support buildings. Usually communities will vote yes because they understand the needs and they want those needs addressed. And in this case, they're going to need to understand what's the value add of using the sales tax option. We also believe that trust with all of your divisions is ultra critical, and that's built long before an election day. So that engagement that's always occurring is going to be critical leading up to and beyond any kind of referendum effort. And we know that the communication process matters just as much as the project itself. Joe Donovan always says, like, Lori, there are no wins or losses with referendums. And that's hard for me because I get all in on these efforts when we engage with communities. But there's always the win in the sense that we are getting deeper engagement with our community, no matter what the end result is. And that's positive for public education and your school divisions. So that's what we're going to spend our time talking about. I'm going to share a process that the Donovan Group uses for referendum engagement. We like to think of that process in 3 different stages. And I'm going to just kind of walk you through these and challenge you as I'm doing so to think about, where are you right now? If you think you're going to head for that November ballot with this tool, then where are you in this process? I'm going to share a desired timeline for where you should be. And then also, if you're thinking more forward, out in the future, what areas are you thinking that you might want to start engaging in now as you're planning forward for a year or 2 years out? So the first stage in a referendum engagement process, we like to identify as the needs stage. And the needs stage is really just identifying and really truly communicating what are your needs of the district or of the division. So often what this looks like is we're sharing, in your case, the facility needs across the division, and doing so through a number of tools. Those tools can be, school newsletters. They could be in print form via email. It could be presentations to any kind of your local community groups. Often the first mention of these needs happens at a board presentation or meeting. It might be, again, the work that you're doing with your capital improvement plan. But the first stage is really being intentional and sharing what are your facility needs with your larger school community, all of your subgroups of that population, to make sure that everyone gets on the runway and understands why you might have an ask for them. And so when I think about what does that look like around creating understanding around a 1% sales tax option and why that might be a great tool, I put together what I think would be an idea for a messaging framework. I think in terms of communicating and engaging your needs, I think it's going to be important that you explain this sales tax option in a way that's very visual, so it's easy to access and understand for all, and also that you put it within the context of your school division as much as possible. And again, some of the things that you can do right away with that is thinking about presenting this information to your board, doing your typical communications with your community, like through a news release, through your internal student information systems you can use, and also share a timeline. Share, be very visual and forward with that timeline that your community should expect if you are considering moving forward with that option. And then where can they expect to engage? Like, we want to, in the needs stage, and as we move into the next stage, the process stage, we want your community members to feel empowered, that they see the need and that they're coming forward and informing, recommending to your board, yes, recommending to the city or the county commissioners or the supervisors, yes, we really need this. So share with them opportunities for where they can engage, and then communicate your facility needs. And it's going to be important that those needs are urgent, I believe, right? And in order to do that is through photos, videos. We've had great success in the past sharing time-lapse videos of like how crowded a cafeteria can get for students, or how dangerous traffic flow patterns can be outside of a school with pickup and drop off. Testimonials from your staff and your students and your parents. Storytelling, sharing stories about how spaces might impact students. And an example I can give you of this, and this is really impactful, people remember these things. I was a superintendent in Wisconsin, and we were working in Wisconsin. We have capital referendum efforts for our facilities. And the board and we went and met with our internal staff first, and we asked them to share with us what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing in your facilities. Like, what kind of impact is that having on your ability to have high quality teaching and learning occurring? And what impact is that having on students? One example that had an immediate impact on the work of the board moving forward was we had a school counselor at the high school come forward and say, the district registrar who registers all new families is located in the high school guidance area. And unfortunately, when students are in crisis, high school students can be sometimes big and scary, who are in crisis are in that space, and we have new families coming in with little kindergartners and enrolling. Like, we gotta have a new space for that. That was very impactful. Like, we can do better than that, right? And so those are the kind of stories that we think really resonate with your taxpayers and your constituents, and have an impact on their decision making as they move forward. I think it's always important to share the ages of your buildings, when they had their most recent renovations or additions, and also giving tours of those spaces. Often people drive by our school buildings all the time, and they just don't really have a good understanding of what it truly looks like on the inside. Maybe they went to school there and they still remember it as it was 30, 40 years ago, and it definitely is not. They're tired. Another thing that should be included in your messaging is demonstrating that as a school division, you've been good stewards of taxpayer dollars. We have found across the country that often people will mix their understanding between operational funding versus funding that's set aside or only allocated for capital improvement projects. So making sure that we demonstrate that difference, maybe showing that, you have a maintenance schedule for your facilities and you're doing the best that you can, show your past spending, and also show enrollment trends. What kind of impact is that having on your facilities? And then lastly, show some long-term facility planning. We have heard in the past that one thing that helps build trust with your community is that they can see that the school board and the division leadership, you have a plan forward for your facilities. So, what does all this look like 10 years from now? Are you going to have to come back 20 years from now and ask for more funding? What does that look like? What does the growth look like in our city, our county, our community? Are we developing a lot, or are we starting to see, just the national trend of low birth rates having an impact on our growth? And then, will you be coming back? Get them on the runway for the future. So feel very fortunate to here at the Donovan Group to be partnered with the City of Fairfax Schools. And I want to preface this by saying, and I think Dustin might be on. So Dustin, I welcome you to unmute and kibitz in at any point. But we supported the City of Fairfax Schools with a bond referendum effort, very successful, 220 million back in November of 2024. And City of Fairfax Schools has been looking at this option and collaborating with their city council about the potential of having this tool available. So back in actually March, April, we started talking and we started putting together what we felt would be some of those action steps that we would need to take in order to be ready with that needs stage. So I'm just sharing this as an example of some of that work that you could be thinking about for yourselves, and also just noting that we're new at this with you as we head into November here. Here's some examples of some of the communication tools that we've already started to put together. And I thought that this would be helpful for those of you that might be considering moving forward for November 3rd. Here on the left-hand side is actually a slide deck that we've put together so that Dustin can use this with his team and the city council can use it to talk about the potential need. Dustin, are you out there with us? Would you like to comment at this time?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lori, and good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be with you. I would just echo what you've heard already from the team here at VASS in terms of our path here in the city of Fairfax. It definitely is not something that started on July 1. You even heard that, initial conversations with Lori were back in March, I believe. And then this has really been something that has been a part of the dialogue in the city of Fairfax for almost the last 2 years since that bond referendum took place in 2024. So the idea of building the consensus, building the partnerships, not only with our school board and their support, but also the city council and the community. And then what we're going to do here in the next several months is really dig into that community engagement that's been going on for a while. So that the advice you heard at the beginning about being thoughtful of this is this the right time for your district and your community is something that I definitely connect to. And then just having really strong partnerships with our governing partners and the city manager and the city staff, the chief financial officer, our bond attorneys, all of those different people have been a big part in working together on this. So our school board did a resolution last week. Our city council is doing the resolution that Micah mentioned on Tuesday, and then it'll go to the circuit courts here in the city of Fairfax. So Lori, thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit.
Yes,
And
absolutely. Absolutely. And feel free to continue to add. And so what I think is a little unique too about City of Fairfax Schools is they haven't begun their project, and that's an important language in the tool here that we've been talking about. So their situation is a little different. But That's what we mean about contextualizing. Each of you are going to have different situations that you'll need to work, side by side with your key leaders in your community. So then the next stage that we will go into after we've shared all the needs and done a great job of articulating those needs is we like to, again, empower our community members as much as possible through a formal process. So we call this the process stage. And this is where we give our community as many opportunities as possible to consider all of those needs and to share voice, to weigh in on what might be good solutions to those needs. And often, through the dive-in group, we'll do this through engagement sessions with your community so that everyone's invited. Sometimes we do this through a task force in a combination with engagement sessions. And often we do it with staff and community surveys. So to dig just a little bit deeper into that, this would be something that those of you who are thinking beyond this fall and looking maybe at next year, be thinking about what kind of tools you might want to use here for that engagement during the process stage. One here on the left is through hosting a task force. Usually this is defined by the school board, where they'll task this group to be a community representative group that comes together and reviews all those things that we talked about as considerations alongside all of the needs, all the facility needs of the division. And they have an opportunity and task to prioritize those needs and make recommendations to the school board. They do this alongside of the school division and doing this in collaboration perhaps with the city, as this picture is in the middle here as a community engagement session with Jeff, who is the previous superintendent at City of Fairfax Schools back in November 2024. We hosted community engagement sessions where everyone is welcome to come in. Often what we get are individuals who don't have a strong connection to the schools. Maybe they're maybe a little bit of an older part of the population. Maybe they don't have any connection with employees working in your schools. And so this is an opportunity to get in front of those individuals and share your needs, let them react to them, and also share their opinions in a thoughtful and organized manner. And then really an important tool during the process stage, we feel, is surveying. And there's a couple of good reasons to survey. One obvious reason is it's an opportunity to measure the level of support for different options. And that can help your school board decide where they might want to fall for a solution. The other is it gives you an opportunity to gain more engagement because everybody can participate in the survey. And the survey is a great informational tool. It's an educational tool. You can use it to communicate your needs, again, through a larger lens. Typically, our surveys include a demographic section so that we can look at the results of those survey questions and responses to see, what is our population who doesn't have any children in our school? What are they thinking and believing versus those who maybe work in our school systems or have children being served? And we also include in the survey a narrative that describes the division's needs, and then we gauge their interest around a number of options there that help us really get close to what the support is for a referendum moving forward. We always used to say it's frequently predictive because we can get, pretty close to an algorithm with the percentage of those who are in support, and come election day, it's about the same percentage. So then the last stage is where Dustin was just mentioning. That's where we are at right now, City of Fairfax Schools for November. This is the solution stage. This is where, it begins when the board makes a decision to place the question on the ballot. Here in this case with Virginia schools, you can go through that exercise. I think it's an important exercise to have your board pass a resolution, but it's really the important entity or body to pass that resolution for the sales tax option is going to be your city council or your county board of supervisors. But once that happens, it's full-on communication and an engagement as much as possible with your community so that they feel that they have all their answers addressed or all their questions addressed. Here, I pulled some of those communication tools from the toolkit that we put together for City of Fairfax schools back in November of 2024. Just wanted to visually give you some examples, of what some of that work looks like. You can see that we worked very closely with the city to develop a tax impact flyer. We did a series of mailers. So you have a postcard here as an example. There were yard signs that were put together. Postage posters and banners. So that's an example here. A big part of the solution stage is keeping your pulse on what the narratives are in your community and responding to that, to make sure that everybody, again, has accurate, up-to-date information that they can use to support their decision making as they head to the polls. As we're looking forward to November 3rd with City of Fairfax schools, just showing again the intentionality that goes behind this kind of effort. And we've mapped out, through the course of August, October, and November up to that date, what is it that we want to do and make sure that we have in place as communication tools. So when we think about a suggested timeline for these 3 stages, for a November effort, you can kind of see what we think works best on the right-hand side here. And I put a little place marker for where we're at right now. So if you, again, are a division thinking about moving forward with this sales tax option in November, you're really at a point where we got to move fast and urgency, but also intentionally, because we're really at that point where you start to convey. And we said by August 14th, we want to have everything approved by the court in your area to move forward. So I wanted to share a slide with you for superintendents to be thinking about what are some of those key tools that you might need to put together if you're going to engage in this kind of effort. And I wanted to spend just a few moments talking about lessons learned and some tips for you all to think about, whether, again, you're going this November or you might use this approach later. But what we have learned over the past few years in supporting districts across the country is that, we'll say often there are irrational yes voters. Like that would be me and my family. If you ask us to support a school system and you need more money, we would say absolutely yes. We don't even need to know the details. Can we also write you an additional check, right? Those are the irrational yes voters. There are also the irrational no voters. No matter what kind of engagement or communications that you deploy, you're most likely not going to change their minds because they don't want to support it. It's the middle that we really want to focus on. Those individuals who maybe are somewhat supportive, maybe just have some questions, or just don't know enough to really have a good, decision. That's where we want to focus all of our communication and engagement efforts. It's really important in these efforts that we think about lanes, that we want to stay in the lane of information, and we don't want to cross over into advocating or telling people how they should vote or that they should support the sales tax option. All we can do is provide factual information, answer questions, make sure they have all the details. So I did share with you here a document that we've put together for a lot of our school systems that we work with about the do's and don'ts of communication during a time of referendum. We believe every conversation during an engagement effort is an opportunity for you to tell your story. This is the win, right? Like we want everybody to be more engaged with our successes. We want everybody to wrap their arms around our school divisions. And so even if you set up a community engagement session and one person shows up, that one person is worth every minute and moment that you give them to tell your story, because you know they're going to go out and share with others. So be open for any group, any setting who wants to learn more about your effort. I know, like in City of Fairfax schools right now, we are mapping out every opportunity that we can think of. We're targeting certain audiences that we want to make sure that we have conversations with, and we're getting on their calendars now. Another great tool is thinking about who can serve as ambassadors for this work. Again, ambassadors as informational leaders, not advocating. But I know a number of you have advisory groups that you work with that are comprised of community and business leaders or parents. They can be great ambassadors by sharing tools, communication strategies that you're using that they could have themselves, and help give you capacity in terms of sharing out information. We also think it's important to respond during this time to any misinformation that starts to circulate in your community. I think it's probably best to prepare for questions that you know are going to come, and any kind of opposition, and just continue to come together as a leadership team to problem solve and address that misinformation. And lastly, just the use of visuals is so critical for helping the average person, in your community to understand what I think is sometimes really complex, educational strategies here. So I wanted to help VASS here and remind everyone that Amy has been doing a great job of working on setting up the next webinar. This will be an opportunity to learn from colleagues, because before 2026, we believe there are 9 of you that have had the authority to pursue that 1% school capital sales tax. And so what's different in moving forward now that we've passed July 1st is now every county and every city has that same opportunity. So there's some great learning that can happen from these localities that you see listed here. And that's set for Wednesday, July 29th at 2 p.m. And there is a QR code there for you to register. And I know Amy will be sharing more information about that. So I'm just going to conclude my comments, and we're going to open it up for Q&A. We're doing great for timing. Just some key takeaways here. I think the very first thing is, sitting in your shoes would be, how urgent is it right now that we take advantage of this tool? How urgent are your facility needs? And that should guide you as to whether or not you want to take advantage of the sales tax option now, or later, or maybe at all. I think it's going to be really important, and you're going to hear that from all of my colleagues here that worked on putting this together for you today, that it's important for you to consult your division's legal counsel if you are planning to move forward this fall, even if you weren't planning to move forward this fall. And then collaborate with your local key leaders. This is not a task that a school division can take on its own in the state of Virginia. So this is where you need to be working side by side with those individuals who are the key leaders in your community. And then your efforts really need to shift quickly if you're moving for November 3rd to engage, engage, engage. Create understanding, create transparency, create trust, right? And then lastly, we're here to assist you. Scott started out by saying, we're doing our best here to interpret this tool, this option for you, and trying to give you the tools that you need to be successful as leaders in your school divisions.